Lisa Chen sat on the old wooden bench outside Riverside Elementary, her fingers nervously picking at a loose thread on her faded jeans. The autumn wind cut through her thin jacket, making her shiver as she watched the big yellow school buses line up in the parking lot. In just 20 minutes, the final bell would ring, and her 8-year-old daughter Sophie would come running out with that bright smile that made everything worth it. She glanced down at her phone to check the time, then quickly put it away. The battery was at 15% and she needed to save it for emergencies. Everything had to be saved these days. Every dollar, every drop of gas, every moment of hope. The other parents were starting to gather now. They arrived in their shiny SUVs and clean sedans, chatting about weekend soccer games and birthday parties while they waited. Lisa recognized most of them by now, but none of them knew her name. She was just the woman who sat alone on the bench, the one they whispered about when they thought she couldn't hear. "Did you see her shoes again today? She'd overheard last week." "I heard she doesn't even have a real address," another voice had added. Lisa looked down at her worn sneakers. The left one had a small hole near the toe, and she'd tried to color over it with a black marker. It worked from a distance, but up close anyone could tell. She tucked her feet under the bench and pulled her jacket tighter. It wasn't always like this. Just 2 years ago, she'd been one of those parents in the nice cars. She'd taught 4th grade at this very school, loved by students and respected by colleagues. She and her husband Mike had a small but comfortable house with a vegetable garden in the back. Sophie had her own room painted pink with butterflies on the walls. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. It was stable. It was theirs. Then Mike started getting headaches. At first, they thought it was stress from his job at the manufacturing plant. But the headaches got worse, and soon came the dizzy spells, the confusion. The day he couldn't remember Sophie's name for 30 terrifying seconds. The diagnosis hit them like a truck. Brain tumor. Aggressive. The doctors said they caught it early enough that surgery might help, but there were no guarantees. The medical bills started piling up immediately. Even with insurance, the specialists, the surgeries, the treatments, it all cost more than they'd ever imagined. Lisa remembered the night she sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by medical bills and insurance statements, trying to figure out how they'd pay for it all. Mike was sleeping upstairs, exhausted from another round of chemotherapy. Sophie was at her mom's house for the weekend, safely away from seeing Daddy so sick. "We'll figure it out," Lisa had whispered to herself that night. "We always figure it out. But some things can't be figured out. Some things just happen, and you hold on as tight as you can until you can't hold on anymore." Mike fought for 18 months. 18 months of hope and fear, of good days and terrible days, of medical appointments and insurance phone calls and watching the man she loved slowly fade away. When he died on that rainy Tuesday morning in March, Lisa felt like part of her soul went with him. The bills didn't stop when Mike did. If anything, they got worse. The funeral costs, the final medical expenses, the credit cards they'd maxed out trying to keep up. Lisa's teaching salary, which had seemed decent when there were 2 incomes, couldn't cover it all. She tried to keep up. She really did. She worked extra tutoring jobs after school, sold everything they owned that wasn't absolutely necessary. The dining room set Mike had surprised her with for their 5th anniversary. His tools from the garage, her grandmother's jewelry. Piece by piece, their life got smaller. The house went into foreclosure 6 months after Mike died. Lisa remembered the day the notice came in the mail. Sophie was coloring at the kitchen table, humming some song she'd learned at school. The normalcy of that moment, her daughter just being a kid, unaware that their world was crashing down, made Lisa step outside to cry so Sophie wouldn't see. They moved in with Lisa's sister for a while, sleeping on the couch in her tiny apartment, but 3 people in a 1-bedroom place was too much, especially with Sophie grieving her father and acting out at school. Lisa could see the strain it put on her sister's own family. After 2 months, she made the decision that still kept her up at night. She bought an old Honda Civic with the last of their savings and told Sophie they were going on an adventure. "We're going to be like campers," she'd said, trying to make it sound fun. "Just you and me exploring the world." Sophie had believed her at first. 8-year-old kids believe what their moms tell them. But 3 months of sleeping in the back seat, of washing up in gas station bathrooms, of eating dinner from convenience stores, even a kid starts to figure things out. Lisa worked when she could find jobs. Day labor, cleaning offices at night, anything that would hire someone without a permanent address. But steady work was hard to come by, and most jobs didn't pay enough to afford first month's rent plus security deposit on an apartment. It was like being stuck in quicksand. The harder she fought, the deeper she sank. The only constant was school. No matter where they'd parked the night before, no matter how little sleep Lisa had gotten, no matter how embarrassed she felt about her appearance, she made sure Sophie got to school every single day. Education was the one thing no one could take away from her daughter. It was the path out of this mess, even if Lisa couldn't see how to walk it herself. Now, sitting on this bench like she did every afternoon, Lisa watched the other parents and tried not to think about how different things could have been. The woman in the blue Lexus was probably a lawyer or a doctor. The man in the pickup truck looked like he worked construction, honest work that paid well. They all had homes to go to, dinner plans that didn't involve checking how much money was left on their food assistance card, but they also didn't have Sophie. None of them had her brilliant, brave, beautiful daughter who still believed her mom could fix anything, who still hugged her tight every morning and said, "I love you, Mommy," like Lisa was the most important person in the world. The school bell rang, and Lisa's heart lifted like it did every day at this moment. In just a few seconds, Sophie would burst through those doors, backpack bouncing, probably with some art project or story about her day. For the next few hours, they'd be together and nothing else would matter. Lisa stood up from the bench and smoothed down her hair. She put on her biggest smile and walked toward the school entrance, ready to catch her daughter and hold her tight, because no matter how hard things got, no matter how uncertain tomorrow looked, this moment right here was everything. Sophie needed her mom to be strong, and Lisa Chen had never failed her daughter yet. She wasn't about to start now. The school doors burst open and children poured out like water breaking through a dam. Lisa's eyes immediately found Sophie among the crowd, her daughter's purple backpack bouncing as she skipped down the steps. But today was different. Sophie wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a little girl with curly blonde hair tied up in pigtails, wearing a bright yellow dress that looked like it cost more than Lisa's entire outfit. The two girls were giggling about something, their heads close together like they were sharing the world's biggest secret. "Mommy," Sophie called out, waving enthusiastically. "This is my new friend Ruby. She just moved here from California and she doesn't know anyone yet." Lisa smiled warmly at Ruby, whose big blue eyes reminded her of her own childhood. "Hi, Ruby, it's nice to meet you." Ruby looked up at Lisa with that curious way kids study adults, then whispered something to Sophie. Both girls burst into giggles again. "Mom, can Ruby come play with us today?" Sophie asked, her eyes full of hope. Lisa's heart sank a little. How could she explain that they didn't have anywhere for friends to come play? That their home was a car parked behind the library? "Well, sweetie, maybe another time when—" "Oh, that's okay," Ruby interrupted politely. "My daddy is picking me up today anyway. He said we're going to get ice cream after school." As if on cue, a shiny black luxury car pulled up to the curb. Lisa had seen plenty of expensive cars during pickup time, but this one was different. It looked like something from a movie. All sleek lines and tinted windows. The engine purred so quietly she could barely hear it. The girls continued chatting excitedly about their day. Ruby had apparently never been to a public school before, and everything was new and fascinating to her. Sophie, always eager to help, was explaining the rules of playground games and which cafeteria food was actually good. "And tomorrow is library day," Sophie was saying. "Mrs. Patterson reads us stories and sometimes she does voices for all the characters." "I love stories," Ruby said, clapping her hands together. "My daddy reads to me every night, but he's always on the phone, so sometimes he forgets the voices." Lisa noticed how Ruby's face fell a little when she mentioned her father being on the phone. Even rich kids had their troubles, apparently. The black car's window rolled down, revealing a man in an expensive suit talking rapidly into a wireless earpiece. He looked stressed, his forehead wrinkled with concentration as he gestured with one hand while speaking. Lisa couldn't hear what he was saying, but his voice carried the sharp tone of someone used to giving orders. "That must be my daddy," Ruby said, but she didn't sound as excited as a kid should about seeing their parent. The man in the car was clearly in the middle of an important business call. Lisa could see him checking his watch repeatedly, his jaw tense with impatience. This was probably just another task on his busy schedule. Pick up daughter, check. Move on to the next important thing. "Ruby, I should go see if he's ready." Sophie suggested, ever the thoughtful friend. The two girls started walking toward the car, still chatting animatedly. Lisa followed a few steps behind, keeping an eye on Sophie like she always did. The school parking lot was busy with parents and buses, and she'd learned to be extra careful during the chaos of pickup time. That's when Lisa noticed something that made her stomach drop. Ruby, excited about sharing more details about her new school, had dropped her small pink purse. The little bag had opened, spilling out crayons, erasers, and a small stuffed animal across the pavement. "Oh no," Ruby cried, immediately dropping to her knees to gather her treasures. Sophie, being the helpful friend she was, rushed to help. "Don't worry, I'll get them," she said, chasing after a purple crayon that was rolling toward the street. Everything seemed to slow down in that moment. Lisa saw the crayon rolling. She saw Sophie following it without looking up. She saw the busy street beyond the sidewalk, where cars moved steadily through the school zone, and then she saw the black luxury car. Ruby's father, still deep in his phone conversation, had started pulling away from the curb, but he wasn't looking in his rearview mirror. He wasn't watching for small children who might be behind his car. His attention was completely focused on whatever business deal or crisis was playing out in his earpiece. The car began to back up, slowly at first, then with more speed as the driver grew impatient with the slow-moving traffic in front of him. Lisa's heart stopped. Sophie was right behind the car, crouched down and reaching for that silly purple crayon, completely unaware of the danger approaching her. "Sophie," Lisa screamed, but her daughter couldn't hear her over the noise of buses and other cars. Time seemed to stretch and contract all at once. Lisa could see exactly what was going to happen, could picture it in horrible detail, but felt like she was moving through thick water. The car continued backing up. Sophie remained focused on gathering Ruby's scattered supplies, her small body hidden behind the massive vehicle. Lisa didn't think. Thinking was a luxury she couldn't afford in that split second between safety and disaster. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, years of protective instincts taking over. She ran faster than she'd run since high school track, her worn sneakers slapping against the pavement. The few seconds stretched into what felt like hours. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel her lungs burning as she pushed herself harder than ever before. "Move," she shouted, though she wasn't even sure if the sound came out. At the last possible moment, Lisa reached Sophie and shoved her daughter toward the sidewalk, sending her rolling safely onto the grass beside the walkway. But Lisa's momentum carried her forward, directly into the path of the still-moving car. The impact knocked the wind out of her completely. One moment she was running, and the next she was on the ground, her vision blurry and her head spinning. She could taste something metallic in her mouth and felt a sharp pain shooting up her left leg. The luxury car stopped immediately, its brake lights glowing red in the afternoon sun. The sudden silence was deafening after all the noise and chaos. "Mommy!" Sophie's voice cut through everything else, high and scared in a way Lisa had never heard before. "Mommy, get up!" Lisa tried to respond, tried to tell her daughter that everything was okay, but the words wouldn't come. She could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting, footsteps running toward her. Someone was calling 911. Someone else was asking if she could hear them. Through her blurry vision, she saw Ruby's father kneeling beside her, his expensive suit getting dirty on the school parking lot pavement. His phone conversation was forgotten, the earpiece hanging loose around his neck. His face had gone completely white. "I'm so sorry," he kept repeating. "I didn't see. I was on the phone. I'm so sorry." But all Lisa could focus on was Sophie's face, her daughter's eyes wide with fear and confusion. Lisa wanted to reach out to tell her baby that Mommy was okay, that everything would be fine. She wanted to promise that this was just another adventure they'd get through together. Instead, everything went dark, and the last thing she heard was Sophie crying for her to wake up. David Chen sat in his car for a full minute after the paramedics drove away, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. The parking lot had mostly cleared out now, leaving behind only a few scattered crayons and the memory of what had just happened. His first instinct had been exactly what you'd expect from someone in his position. Call his lawyer, call his insurance company, make sure Ruby was okay, then figure out how to protect himself from what was surely going to be a messy legal situation. That's what successful businessmen do when accidents happen. They manage the situation, but something was wrong with his usual game plan. Every time he tried to focus on the practical matters, He kept seeing that woman's face just before she hit the ground. The determination in her eyes as she threw herself between his car and her daughter. The way she'd looked at the little girl afterward, even while she was hurt and probably scared. "Daddy?" Ruby's voice was small from the back seat. She'd been unusually quiet since they'd watched the ambulance leave. "Is that lady going to be okay?" David glanced in the rearview mirror. His daughter was clutching her stuffed animal tight against her chest, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sure she'll be fine, sweetheart," but he wasn't sure at all. The woman had hit the pavement hard. There had been blood. The paramedics had worked on her for what felt like forever before loading her into the ambulance. "She saved Sophie," Ruby continued. "Sophie could have been hurt really bad, but her mommy pushed her away." David's stomach twisted. He'd been so focused on his conference call that he hadn't even seen the children behind his car. If that woman hadn't acted so fast, if she hadn't been paying attention when he wasn't... "Daddy, why were you on the phone when you were driving?" The question hit him like a slap. "I wasn't driving, Ruby, I was just backing up." "But you're supposed to look when you back up." "That's what you always tell me." David closed his eyes. 8 years old. And his daughter understood responsibility better than he did in that moment. His phone buzzed with another call. Probably his assistant wondering why he'd missed his 4 p.m. meeting. He looked at the screen, then turned the phone off completely. For the first time in years, business would have to wait. "Come on," he said, getting out of the car. "We're going to the hospital." Ruby brightened a little. "To see if the lady is okay?" "Yeah," David said, taking his daughter's hand. "To see if she's okay." The drive to General Hospital took 20 minutes through afternoon traffic. David found himself thinking about things he usually pushed aside. Like how he'd been working late every night this month. How Ruby ate dinner with the nanny more often than with him. How his ex-wife had been right when she said he cared more about making money than making memories. The hospital parking garage smelled like antiseptic and car exhaust. Ruby wrinkled her nose as they walked toward the elevators. "I don't like hospitals," she said quietly. "Me neither," David admitted. The last time he'd been in a hospital was when Ruby was born. His ex-wife had begged him to take time off work for the birth, but he'd brought his laptop anyway, answering emails between contractions. The emergency room was busy and loud. David approached the front desk, suddenly uncertain about what to say. "Excuse me, there was a woman brought in about an hour ago? Car accident at Riverside Elementary?" The nurse looked up from her computer. "Are you family?" David hesitated. I was involved in the accident." "The police will want to speak with you," she said, reaching for her phone. "No, that's not why I'm here." David glanced down at Ruby, who was listening to every word. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay, and to see if there's anything I can do to help." The nurse studied him for a moment, then softened. "Let me see what I can find out." While they waited, David noticed the other people in the emergency room. An elderly man holding an ice pack to his wrist. A young mother with a crying baby. A teenager with his arm in a makeshift sling. Everyone looked worried, scared, or tired. Everyone except him had probably driven here in cars that weren't worth more than most people's houses. "Sir?" The nurse was back. "The patient is stable. She's got a broken leg and some bruising, but she's awake. The little girl is with her. Can we see them?" Ruby asked hopefully. The nurse looked uncertain. "I'm not sure that's..." "Please," David said. "I need to apologize, and I need to make sure they're okay." Something in his voice must have convinced her. Room 237, but just for a few minutes. The walk down the hospital hallway felt longer than any boardroom presentation David had ever given. Ruby held his hand tightly, her little shoes squeaking on the polished floor. Room 237 was small and cramped, with 2 beds separated by a thin curtain. In the first bed, the woman from the parking lot was lying with her leg elevated, wearing a hospital gown that had seen better days. The little girl, Sophie, was curled up in a chair beside the bed, still wearing her school clothes. Both mother and daughter looked up when David and Ruby appeared in the doorway. For a moment, nobody said anything. "Hi," David said finally, feeling more nervous than he had in any $1,000,000 negotiation. "Hi," Lisa replied quietly. Her voice was hoarse, probably from the pain medication. Sophie sat up straighter, recognizing Ruby. "Ruby, what are you doing here?" "We came to see if you and your mommy were okay," Ruby said, letting go of her father's hand and moving closer to the bed. David stayed back, unsure of his welcome. "I'm so sorry," he said to Lisa. I was distracted and I should have been more careful. This is all my fault. Lisa studied his face for a long moment. You weren't trying to hurt anyone, she said finally. Accidents happen. Her kindness made David feel worse, not better. This woman who was lying in a hospital bed because of his carelessness was trying to make him feel better about it. The doctor says you'll be here for a few days, he said. Lisa nodded, glancing at Sophie. They want to monitor me for a concussion, and this leg is going to take some time to heal. David noticed the way she looked at her daughter when she said it. There was worry there, but she was trying to hide it. What about work? Will your employer understand? Lisa's laugh was bitter. I don't exactly have a traditional job situation. What do you mean? Lisa exchanged a look with Sophie, who was now showing Ruby the TV remote and explaining how to change channels. It's complicated, she said, but David was a businessman. He was good at reading between the lines, at understanding what people weren't saying. He looked at Lisa's worn clothes, at the way Sophie clung to her mother, at the fact that they'd been in the school parking lot in the middle of the day. You don't have anywhere to go, he said quietly. Lisa's cheeks reddened. We're managing just fine. I didn't mean to offend you. David ran his hand through his hair, trying to find the right words. I want to help. I need to help. You don't owe us anything. Yes, I do. David moved closer to the bed, lowering his voice so the girls wouldn't hear. You saved your daughter's life today. Maybe mine too, in a way. If something had happened to her because I wasn't paying attention, he couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Ruby getting hurt because of his negligence was unbearable. Look, he continued, I know we don't know each other, but I have resources and you have a problem I can help solve. Let me at least cover your medical bills. Lisa started to shake her head, but David held up his hand. It's not charity, he said. It's responsibility. And maybe it's a chance for both of us to figure out what really matters. Outside the room, he could hear Ruby teaching Sophie some complicated hand-clapping game, their laughter echoing down the hospital corridor. For the first time in months, David wasn't thinking about his next business meeting. He was thinking about being a better man. 3 days later, David found himself walking down the same hospital corridor again, carrying a bag of books and a box of crayons that Ruby had insisted on bringing for Sophie. He'd told himself he was just checking on Lisa's recovery, making sure the medical bills were being handled properly. But deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. Lisa was sitting up in bed when he arrived, looking much better than she had the first day. The color had returned to her cheeks and she was helping Sophie with what looked like homework, spread across the hospital table. Mr. Chen, Sophie called out when she saw him. Look what I drew. She held up a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a hospital with stick figures standing outside. One figure was wearing a yellow dress like Ruby's and another had dark hair like Lisa's. That's beautiful, Sophie, David said, meaning it. Is that you and your mom? And you and Ruby too, Sophie pointed to 2 other figures. Ruby said you might come visit again, so I drew all of us together. David felt something tighten in his chest. When was the last time anyone had drawn a picture that included him? When was the last time Ruby had been excited about him visiting anywhere? Where is Ruby today? Lisa asked, noticing his daughter's absence. With her nanny, David said, then immediately felt embarrassed. Here was a mother who clearly did everything for her child herself, and he was admitting that he paid someone else to take care of his daughter most days. But Lisa didn't judge him. She just nodded and asked, how's she doing? She seemed pretty shaken up the other day. She's been asking about you and Sophie constantly, David said, settling into the chair beside the bed. I think she's worried about making new friends at school. Moving here from California has been hard on her. Sophie mentioned Ruby was new. Starting over somewhere strange can be scary for kids. David looked at Lisa more carefully. Sounds like you speak from experience. Lisa glanced at Sophie, who was coloring intently, then back at David. We've done our share of starting over lately. Something in her voice made David want to know more, but he could tell she wasn't ready to share everything yet. Instead, he pulled out his phone to show her pictures Ruby had taken of her new bedroom. She decorated it herself, he said, scrolling through photos of walls covered in artwork and stuffed animals arranged on shelves. I hired an interior designer, but Ruby wanted to do it her way. She has good taste, Lisa said, smiling at a photo of Ruby's desk covered in colorful notebooks and art supplies. Sophie would love a setup like that for homework. David realized what he'd said wrong immediately. Here he was, showing off his daughter's elaborate bedroom to a woman who was homeless. "I'm sorry, I didn't think—" "It's okay," Lisa said quickly. "I like seeing kids happy in their spaces. That's what matters." Her kindness continued to surprise him. Most people in her situation would resent someone like him, would be bitter about the unfairness of it all. But Lisa seemed genuinely happy for Ruby, with no trace of jealousy or resentment. "Can I ask what happened?" David said quietly. "How you ended up— I mean, if you don't mind talking about it." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, watching Sophie work on her drawing. "I used to teach 4th grade, she said finally. "At Sophie's school, actually. We had a house, 2 cars, the whole middle-class dream. What changed? My husband got sick." Lisa's voice was steady, but David could hear the pain underneath. "Brain tumor. Even with insurance, the medical bills were enormous. We fought it for a year and a half, spent everything we had and more. He died last spring." David felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Lisa, I'm so sorry. The bills didn't stop when he did. We lost the house, maxed out credit cards trying to keep up. I was working 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough." She gestured around the hospital room. "We've been living in my car for the past few months." David stared at her, trying to process what she'd just told him. This intelligent, caring woman had been a teacher. She'd had a normal, stable life just 2 years ago, and now she was homeless because her husband got sick. "That's not right," he said, his voice harder than he intended. "It's life," Lisa replied simply. "Bad things happen to good people every day. The trick is not letting it make you bitter. How do you do that? How do you stay so—" He searched for the right word. "Positive?" Lisa looked at Sophie, who was now drawing what appeared to be a rainbow over the hospital. "Because she needs me to. Because giving up isn't an option when someone depends on you." David thought about all the times he'd felt sorry for himself because a business deal fell through, or because he had to work late and miss dinner. His problem suddenly seemed incredibly small. "You know," Lisa continued, "I used to worry about the strangest things. Whether we could afford to renovate the kitchen. Whether Sophie's backpack was trendy enough. Whether other parents judged us because we didn't take fancy vacations." She laughed, but it wasn't bitter. "Funny how much simpler life gets when you realize what actually matters." "What actually matters?" "This," Lisa said, gesturing to Sophie. "Making sure she feels safe and loved. Making sure she knows that no matter what happens, I'll figure out a way to take care of her. Everything else is just noise." David nodded, but he was thinking about his own life. When was the last time Ruby had felt like his top priority? When was the last time he'd made her feel safe and loved, instead of just provided for financially? "I envy you," he said suddenly, then immediately felt stupid for saying it. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You envy me? I'm lying in a hospital bed with no home and no job." "But you know who you are," David said, trying to explain what he meant. "You know what matters to you. I've got more money than I could spend in a lifetime, but half the time I don't even remember why I'm working so hard anymore." "To take care of Ruby," Lisa said like it was obvious. "Is it though? Or am I working because it's all I know how to do?" David ran his hands through his hair. "My ex-wife used to say I hid behind my work, that it was easier for me to make money than to actually be present for my family. Was she right?" David considered lying, giving some explanation about providing for his family's future. But something about Lisa's honesty made him want to be honest too. "Yeah, probably. I grew up poor, and I swore I'd never put my kid through that. But somewhere along the way I forgot that being poor isn't just about money." "What do you mean?" "Ruby has everything she could want materially, but she doesn't have me. Not really. I'm always on my phone, always thinking about the next deal, always somewhere else even when I'm right there with her." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "It's not too late, you know. To change that, how? I don't even know where to start." "Start small," Lisa said, smiling at Sophie, who was now adding stick figure birds to her rainbow. "Ask Ruby about her day and actually listen to the answer. Eat dinner together without checking your phone. Read her a story before bed." David thought about the book of fairy tales sitting on Ruby's nightstand, the one she kept asking him to read with her. He always said maybe tomorrow after this call when things calm down at work. "She loves being read to," he said quietly. "Then read to her," Lisa said simply. "Tonight." It sounded so easy when she said it. But David knew it would be the hardest thing he'd done in years. Sitting still, being present, letting the business world wait while he focused on his daughter. "What if I mess it up?" he asked. "What if I'm not good at it? Lisa smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. Trust me, kids don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to try. Looking at this woman who'd lost everything but still had hope, David realized he wanted to be the kind of person who deserved that smile. The kind of person who put people before profit, who understood what really mattered in life. Maybe it wasn't too late to learn. 6 weeks later, Lisa stood in the doorway of her new apartment watching Sophie run from room to room with pure joy on her face. It wasn't a big place, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with windows that let in the morning sun. But after months of sleeping in a car, it felt like a palace. Mom, look, Sophie called from her bedroom. I have my own closet. And look at this bed. Lisa smiled, remembering how Sophie had gasped when they'd first seen the twin bed with its simple white frame and cheerful blue comforter. Such a small thing, but to a child who'd been sleeping in the backseat of a Honda, it was everything. The apartment had been David's idea, but he'd been careful about how he presented it. He'd learned enough about Lisa over the past month to know she wouldn't accept charity, no matter how much she needed help. I have a proposition, he'd said during one of his daily hospital visits. I need someone to help me figure out how to be a better father to Ruby. And you need a place to stay while your leg heals and you get back on your feet. Lisa had looked suspicious. What kind of help? Ruby's struggling in school. Not with the work, she's smart, but with making friends, adjusting to the move. Her mother thinks I should get her a therapist, but honestly, I think she just needs someone who understands kids, someone who used to be a teacher. It was true, but it was also David's way of offering Lisa work that would let her keep her dignity while accepting his help. Lisa had been quiet for a long moment, then asked about the details. The arrangement was simple. Lisa would tutor Ruby after school 3 days a week and help her with social adjustment issues. In exchange, David would provide a furnished apartment near Ruby's school and cover living expenses until Lisa found permanent work. It wasn't a handout. It was a job with benefits. Now standing in that apartment, Lisa felt something she hadn't felt in over a year, hope for the future. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Ruby's excited about today. She made you both a welcome card. Lisa smiled. The past few weeks of working with Ruby had been good for everyone involved. The little girl was bright and funny, but she'd been struggling with the transition from private school in California to public school here. She'd been acting out in class, withdrawing from other kids, clearly missing her old life. But Ruby had responded well to Lisa's gentle approach. Lisa remembered what it felt like to be the new kid, to feel like you didn't belong anywhere. She'd helped Ruby join the art club at school, introduced her to Sophie's friend group, and most importantly, helped her see that starting over could be an adventure instead of a punishment. The changes in David had been even more dramatic. The first few tutoring sessions, he'd hovered nearby, checking his phone constantly, clearly uncomfortable with letting someone else handle his daughter's problems. But gradually, he'd started to relax. He'd begun sitting with them during homework time, asking questions about what Ruby was learning, actually listening to her answers. Last week, Lisa had arrived to find them reading together on the couch, Ruby curled up against her father's side as he did different voices for all the characters in her favorite story. The sight had made Lisa's heart skip a beat, not because of any romantic feelings, but because it reminded her of her own father reading to her when she was small. "Mommy?" Sophie appeared beside her, tugging on her hand. "When is Ruby coming over?" "In about an hour," Lisa said, checking the time. "Are you excited to show her your room?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Having Ruby as a friend had been wonderful for her, too. After months of instability, Sophie was finally able to have a normal childhood again. Playdates, sleepovers, the kinds of experiences Lisa had worried they'd never be able to provide. The doorbell rang and Sophie raced to answer it. Ruby stood in the hallway holding a handmade card and a small potted plant, with David behind her carrying what looked like groceries. "Welcome to your new home," Ruby announced, holding up the card. "I drew pictures of all our favorite things we can do here." Lisa opened the card to find crayon drawings of them baking cookies, watching movies, and playing board games. "This is beautiful, Ruby, thank you." David stepped forward with the grocery bags. "I thought maybe we could all cook dinner together tonight." Ruby picked out the menu. "Spaghetti and meatballs," Ruby announced. "And garlic bread. And salad, because that's healthy." Lisa looked at David, surprised. "You cook?" He laughed, looking a little embarrassed. I'm learning. Ruby's been teaching me. Turns out she knows more about the kitchen than I do. It was true. Over the past month, David had been making an effort to learn all the things about parenting that money couldn't buy. He'd started cooking simple meals with Ruby instead of ordering takeout every night. He'd learned to braid her hair for school. He'd even figured out how to pack a proper lunch that didn't come from the deli downstairs. Can we see Sophie's room? Ruby asked, bouncing on her toes. The girls ran off together, leaving David and Lisa alone in the kitchen. He began unpacking groceries while she put the card from Ruby on the refrigerator next to one of Sophie's drawings. How does it feel? David asked quietly. Having your own place again? Like I can breathe, Lisa said honestly. I didn't realize how much stress I was carrying until I didn't have to anymore. David nodded, arranging pasta boxes on the counter. I've been thinking about what you said in the hospital. About knowing what matters, and I think I'm starting to figure it out. He looked toward the living room where they could hear the girls giggling. Ruby told me yesterday that I'm more fun now. She said I used to always look worried, but now I smile more. Lisa studied his face. He did look different than he had that first day in the hospital parking lot. Less stressed, more present. How does it feel? Being more fun? Scary, David admitted. But good scary. Like maybe I've been missing out on the best parts of life because I was too busy chasing the wrong things. What were you chasing? David thought for a moment. Security, I guess. I grew up without much money, and I was so focused on making sure Ruby never experienced that. I forgot that there are other ways to be poor. Lisa understood. You can be poor in time, poor in attention, poor in love. Exactly. David opened a package of ground beef. I had this idea that being a good father meant providing financially, but Ruby doesn't care about the size of our house or how expensive her clothes are. She just wants me to be present when I'm with her. From the living room came the sound of Sophie explaining the rules of some elaborate game she'd invented. Ruby's delighted laughter followed. You know what the strangest part is? David continued. I'm actually enjoying work more now, too. When I'm there, I'm focused on being there. When I'm home, I'm focused on being home. Everything feels more intentional. Lisa smiled. That's what balance looks like, is it? I always thought balance was some impossible juggling act, but maybe it's just about being fully wherever you are. The girls came running back into the kitchen, breathless and excited. Mom, Ruby wants to have a sleepover this weekend, Sophie announced. Can we, Dad, please? Ruby added, looking up at David with hopeful eyes. David looked at Lisa, then back at his daughter. That sounds perfect. As they started cooking dinner together, all four of them crowded into Lisa's small kitchen, laughing as Ruby tried to show Sophie how to roll meatballs while David struggled with the garlic bread. Lisa felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with people who had become more than friends. They had become family, chosen and cherished and real. And looking at David helping Sophie reach the spice cabinet while Ruby chattered about her day at school, Lisa knew that sometimes the most beautiful things in life came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes saving someone else was really just another way of saving yourself.